So here I am with Zelda Breath of the Wild after years of waiting and development, and yeah, my review's over a month late. Sorry about that, but here we go. Is it good? What do I think of it? My channel's just over 2 years old. It's weird looking back on how little we knew about this game. We just knew it as Zelda Wii U, the upcoming 2015 open world game, and man is waiting for this game being a ride. Now I look back on my channel, on the old trailers, it's weird how this game has actually been quite an important part of my life. Always something up ahead, always something to look forward to, speculate on, and, well, fanboy over.
Oh, just take it, just take the money, take it, have it, that's a train ticket, I don't care, take my money.
So now that Breath of the Wild's out, and to near universal critical acclaim, what are my opinions on it? Is it as good as people say? And was it worth the massive wait and countless hours of speculation and hype? Well, while I'm nowhere even near beating everything in the game, I have beaten the main quest and have put over 100 hours into the game at the time of writing this script, and likely far more by the time it's edited and out to you guys, so I think I've seen enough of the game to get a pretty solid opinion on how I feel about it right now, its flaws, its successes, and how it could stack up against its predecessors in the future. And yeah, I said flaws. Oh sweet, a legendary spear handed down to me from the princess of the Zora tribe. Awesome, I can't wait to use the... Oh. I'll spoil something for you about my opinions for the game now. I fucking love it, and I'm a Zelda channel. If you're not subscribed to me, you're probably expecting a free pass all the way to the 10 out of 10 score. But I'm going to make this review as fair as possible, and I won't say that it's absolutely flawless. Like with Ocarina of Time, when making a jump this big with a series as prestigious as Zelda, there are always going to be chinks in the armour. So if you feel at any point in this review I'm dwelling on the negatives too much, and it seems like I didn't enjoy myself, that couldn't be further from the truth. I absolutely loved it, and its meteoric successes such as the completely and absolutely unparalleled sense of exploration, gorgeous visuals and deep sense of mystery. But I won't hold back on pointing out areas I didn't enjoy as much either, which there were a few of. In addition to this, I'll be doing this review Boogie2988 style. That is, the first half of the review will be spoiler free, before I give you guys a spoiler warning and go into spoilers for the second half, and then I'll do a final spoiler free summary at the end. That way you guys can have a spoiler free review if you'd like, by just skipping ahead when I give you a warning to the summary. So let's get into it. Okay, so this is the first spoiler free half of the review. I spent a little while breaking down what I love about Zelda games, and to be honest games in general, down into a set of categories, and I'll see how Breath of the Wild stacks up. The categories I've chosen are exploration, music, combat, story, dungeons, visuals, and fun factor. Okay, time to actually, review the game. Let's get into the first category, exploration. Ever since we first heard anything about Zelda Wii U in 2013, IG Aonuma made it very clear that exploration was the key to this game. True, boundless exploration and discovery with no loading screens and no invisible walls. And as they kept saying in interviews, you can go anywhere. And I'm not going to beat around the bush. Breath of the Wild does this brilliantly. Seriously. This is probably the least limited I've ever felt in a game in terms of where I can go, when I can get there, meaning that the whole world is accessible really early on, right after the tutorial section, the Great Plateau, where 4 shrines must be beaten in order to leave. While technically Breath of the Wild's tutorial segment is just as long as other Zeldas, taking around an hour or so on average to fully complete the plateau, it's hard to really count this area as a tutorial segment. There's a huge amount of content here alone, such as hidden enemy bases, bosses and secrets. Yeah, you heard it right, we've got a tutorial section that actually lets you see what the game's like, rather than fishing for cats. But even this giant area is absolutely nothing compared to the scale and depth of the full world. One of the largest worlds in any game I've ever played, and it's for the most part full of content. In fact, it's often hard to keep on track. Planning to travel from one area to another is almost impossible without getting lost and travelling off in a completely different direction, following something weird or exciting. Part of what inspired Miyamoto to create the original Legend of Zelda was exploring the countryside around his home city of Kyoto as a child. Finding secrets in the fields around his house was what made him want to create Zelda as a miniature garden players could keep inside their drawer. And I think that now, 31 years after the release of the original, Miyamoto's dream has been realised in the closest sense we've seen in any game I've ever played. And we haven't even talked about a huge mechanic of the game, the climbing. Link's pretty athletic this time around and can climb nearly anything he sees. This adds an entirely new level of depth to the world in the form of the verticality. Climbing huge peaks and sailing down with a paraglider is a really fun and effective way to travel. Of course, the exploration in Breath of the Wild isn't completely without its hitches. There are a few areas that are pretty much empty, such as the Gerudo Highlands, featuring hardly anything more than snow and enemies. In addition to this, it is quite discouraging how most of the secrets and puzzles found in the overworld will only result in the discovery of a shrine. There's not much variation. I'll talk about shrines later in the dungeon segment, since they're essentially the game's mini dungeons, but it did start to get repetitive knowing that finding secrets in the overworld would likely only result in the discovery of a shrine. And the last issue I have with the exploration in Breath of the Wild is rain. Fucking rain. Seriously, how did they make the weather so annoying? If there's such a massive focus on climbing in this game, why make rain so common if it makes it almost impossible to climb anything? At some points when I was faced with a cliff that I needed to climb, I'd simply put the game down and leave the room for a bit until the weather had changed. I understand the need for depth with the weather system, but the rain in Breath of the Wild only ever felt irritating, never like an actual challenge. Overall, the exploration in Breath of the Wild is absolutely unparalleled in the series. With only a few hitches, such as the lack of variety in what you can discover and the bloody rain, I still think that Breath encapsulates the series' original goal the best of any game. And for these reasons, I have to give the game's exploration a 10 out of 10. It's by far the best the series has ever gotten to capturing the feel of a real world and one of the most immersive worlds of any game to date. Music is without a doubt one of the most important aspects of the Legend of Zelda series. It's part of what makes the game so special to me and so nostalgic. And after hearing Breath of the Wild's astonishingly beautiful main theme at the E3 2016 reveal of the game, I was really hyped for another stellar Zelda soundtrack. Despite how important music is to the Zelda series, in my opinion this is one area where I think Breath of the Wild falls slightly short. Zelda's usual memorable and upbeat soundtrack, songs like The Great Sea, Hyrule Field or Kokiri Forest, make way for a few simple, scattered notes on occasion, or quiet, softer music. At some points however, the music fits absolutely perfectly, don't get me wrong, such as the slow Temple of Time theme that plays in its ruins. The song's in a broken condition just like the world itself. I just wish that at some points we got more powerful, heroic Zelda music. This isn't to say that some of the themes in the soundtrack aren't awesome, like the Talus boss fight theme, Stable theme as well as a few others are really good. And oh my god, the music from the Rito village had me in tears. The slow version of Wind Waker's Dragon Roost Island theme is absolutely perfect and I love it. Some of the other game's themes fit really well too, such as the You Done Fucked Up theme. Overall, while I would have hoped for a slightly stronger soundtrack, Breath of the Wild's music serves its purpose well, just not quite as well as other Zelda games, so I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. Right, now we're really getting into it. Combat. Breath of the Wild's combat was one of the major things I was hyped about from the game's E3 blowout reveal, and mainly for one reason. This game is hard. Usually in Zelda games, running up to an enemy and spamming the B button is all it takes to give them a pretty swift seeing off. But Breath of the Wild forces you to learn their movement and attack patterns and respond in an appropriate way in order to triumph. And that's a really good thing, and it's something I hope is continued in the series indefinitely. Take the Flurry Rush for example. This special move is nigh invaluable when battling some harder enemies later on in the game. It involves dodging an enemy attack a split second before you'd be hit, then retaliating with a rampageous series of your own blows. This special move is such a good feature because in order to use it, you need to study your enemy. You need to learn their moves, learn the signals they give before they attack, and learn the correct way to avoid them. And that's only one of the special moves, not even getting into parrying, sneak attacking, stamina involved attack sequences and more. And of course I need to mention that one of the major things people notice about Breath of the Wild when they first start, that it's hard, and it's completely common to find an enemy that will smack you for all of your hearts in one go. Hyrule really wants Link dead this time around. This level of difficulty, in my opinion, is a welcome change. Another, far more controversial, change to the Zelda formula comes in the form of weapon durability. Your melee weaponry, your bows and your shields will all degrade over time before eventually breaking, forcing you to be constantly on the lookout for different, more durable weapons. This system has its advantages and its disadvantages. An upside is how, since no weapon in the game is completely invincible, you'll never find an item and stick with it for the whole game. You might be in the middle of a battle against an enemy when your favourite sword breaks, forcing you to pick up or use a weapon of a different type, a weapon you're not used to, forcing you to learn more about the game's combat system and giving the game a constant sense of progression. However, the opposite could also be argued here. While I completely agree that it does improve the game in some ways, I did find that it negated the thrill of finding an item a little bit. In previous Zelda games, finding, say, the boomerang in a dungeon was an awesome moment. This was a really cool addition to your arsenal that you can rely on from the rest of the game. But in Breath of the Wild, finding a really good weapon will be tied to the niggling feeling that at some point the item will break and you'll have to replace it, often leading to me just avoiding combat situations entirely in order to keep my items intact. Despite this minor niggle, overall Breath of the Wild's combat is without a doubt the best we've seen in the series so far, in terms of depth, realism and, well, just how fun it is. I give the combat system a 10 out of 10. Right, I'm not going to beat around the bush with this one, I'll get right to the point. This game's beautiful. Aside from a few frame drops, especially in areas with heavy grass and at a particularly important area of the story, which I won't reveal here, this game truly is a visual masterpiece. Yet you can argue that with how the Wii U and Switch are underpowered compared to modern day standards, the game doesn't look as technically impressive as competitors like Horizon Zero Dawn, but in my opinion the art style more than makes up for it. The awesome advanced cell shading looks stunning, even if I do wish it was a little more saturated. Visually, I give this game a 9.5 out of 10. Okay, now I'm going to get into the spoiler section of the game, so spoiler warning. This is the official spoiler warning. I know that even if I make this part incredibly obvious, there'll still be complaints in the comments, but you can't say I didn't warn you. If there's one thing that the Zelda series has been focusing on more in recent years, it's the game's stories. The last 3D Zelda before Breath was Skyward Sword, which had, in my opinion, downright the best storyline of any of the games. So for me at least, Breath of the Wild had big boots to fill. Though, obviously, the game focused more on exploration, rather than a linear experience like Skyward Sword. So how does it hold up? Well, in my opinion, not well. Sort of really not well. Breath of the Wild opts, instead of a story that progresses with you as you complete more and more of the game, to lock a lot of it behind cutscenes in the form of memories. While the actual content of some of these memory cutscenes, which are things Link remembers from before his 100-year sleep at the second rise of Calamity Ganon, are really cool, because of how they're worked into the game they feel so disconnected and in my opinion basically irrelevant to the current game. These memories are unlocked by finding the locations saved in photos on your Sheikah slate, which will then activate a cutscene. So you can go out of your way if you want more story for the game, but it just doesn't seem as effective as stories in past Zeldas. And yeah, there is some story in the present, with helping the four main races, the Zora, Rito, Gerudo and Gorons, deal with their respective rampaging, corrupted divine beasts, but these all still feel much weaker than I expected from a Zelda game. I know the game was focusing more on exploration and open world fun, but it does seem like the story was overlooked and sort of felt tacked on rather than a truly deep experience woven into the gameplay, like in, say, Wind Waker, where the characters have real development and depth. Breath of the Wild's characters, for the most part, lack this human side to them, which is a shame. There are some emotional moments for sure, like when Daruk sees Yunobo from the top via Rudania, but overall I felt that the game lacking true character development was a big blow. And while we're here, I'll talk about the game's final boss. The showdown against Calamity Ganon was hyped up from the very start of the game, where we see the ominous, shadowy silhouette of the Demon King circling the castle. Then, whenever Link battles his way into the sanctum of the castle, the showdown begins against the ferocious Calamity Ganon, a disturbing, twisted mess of Sheikah parts, malice, and what looks like Ganondorf's remains. The fight against the Calamity is challenging, if a little bit same old due to the fact that it's just a souped up version of the fights against the game's four main bosses, Fire, Wind, Thunder and Water Blight Ganons. You need to make good use of reflecting his attacks and perfect dodging them in order to come out on top, resulting in a really quite violent death by Zelda standards. Jesus, the dude gets torn to shreds before exploding into a mist. Ouch. However, the Calamity turns out to just be the penultimate boss of the game, as Ganon's consciousness gives up on reincarnation and pours all its hatred and fury into one final form, a monstrous boar demon the size of a castle. I can't tell you just how hyped I was when I first saw Dark Beast Ganon in the game. Just Link and his trusty steed against an incredibly intimidating, gargantuan monster. I thought that maybe the developers had finally realised the dream they had when creating Ocarina of Time's Ganon fight, where the Demon King was a mountainous beast which must be climbed in order to beat it, Shadow of the Colossus style. How cool would an ending like this be? But how do we defeat this massive villain this time around at the climax of one of the hardest Zeldas ever? We gallop round the near-immobile, near-defenceless beast, hitting targets with the bow of light until we can hit it in the eye and kill it. Yeah. Seriously, I get that the Calamity fight was supposed to be the test of strength, with the Dark Beast being more of a symbolic end to Ganon, but I really did wish for a better fight at the end of the game. The fight felt incomplete, tacked on, and to be honest just unfitting for the end of Breath of the Wild. Zelda games' final bosses have never been particularly challenging, but I think Dark Beast Ganon takes the cake for the easiest in the series so far. The story of Breath of the Wild, in my opinion, gets a 6 out of 10. Breath of the Wild's dungeons are one of the biggest changes to the Zelda formula we've seen, and this brings both good things and bad. The game throws away the traditional dungeon designs like the Fire Temple, Water Temple or whatever, and instead we get the Divine Beasts. The Divine Beasts are 4 gargantuan Sheikah constructs, Var Naboris, Var Ruta, Var Rudania and Var Medo, titans in the shape of a camel, an elephant, a salamander and a bird respectively. These 4 beasts were originally designed to seal the Calamity, which they did at its first appearance 10,000 years prior to Breath of the Wild. However, at its resurgence, the Calamity corrupted both the beasts and the Guardians, effectively seizing control of an army of almost godlike power. The 4 beasts serve as the game's dungeon. In order to free them from their corruption and return them to the control of the late champions, Link must enter each one, activate a number of control terminals with his Sheikah Slate, and then defeat the Scourge placed there by the Calamity. The 4 Divine Beasts do serve as probably the most creative dungeons in Zelda history. When a control terminal is accessed, huge portions of the dungeon, or even in some cases the entire dungeon itself, can be rotated or moved in order to change aspects of how the dungeon works. The best example of this was Var Ruta, where the trunk of the elephant could be moved in order to change where the water pours, moving giant water wheels and extinguishing fires. While these 4 dungeons are really cool and creative, there are only 4 of them, and in a game as massive as content rich as Breath, 4 dungeons does sort of miss the mark, at least a little bit. I would have absolutely loved the 4 Divine Beasts to be in conjunction with 4 traditional dungeons, perhaps like a fire, forest, wind and earth temple in hidden locations around the map, which would also solve the issue of diversity, which is the other issue I have with the beasts. From their design, to the enemies encountered inside, even up to the bosses, the Divine Beasts really aren't very different from one another. Part of the joy of Zelda dungeons in older games is how creative and different they are from one another. Well, the Divine Beasts kind of feel like 4 parts of the same dungeon. This leads into the game's mini-dungeons, the Shrines, since I feel like they suffer the same issue. The Shrines are smaller dungeons, 120 of them scattered across the world as challenges for the hero to prove his might. But like the Divine Beasts, they're all designed exactly the same way, the same music, same visuals, same rewards for the most part. However, the actual meat and potatoes, the actual combat challenges or puzzles of each shrine are so different from one another that I think the identical design could be forgiven. Seriously, the solutions for the shrine puzzles are so creative. I honestly could not figure out how to solve this puzzle until I had the crazy idea of laying out a metal weapon to continue the current. And it worked! I've no clue if this is actually the right way to solve it, but this just goes to show how awesome the puzzles in this game can be. Anyway, regardless of minor problems, I think that the 4 Divine Beasts are absolutely 4 of the most outstanding and memorable dungeons in Zelda history, and the shrines, while repetitive in design, are so far from being repetitive in content. Overall, I give the dungeons of the game a solid 9 out of 10. Spoiler section over. There you go, that wasn't so bad, was it? Okay, just before we jump into the summary, now we've covered everything, is this game actually fun? Sure, it has great exploration, it's pretty, the combat's good, but is it actually fun to play? I mean, yeah, obviously. I've probably had more fun with Breath of the Wild than I have with any other Zelda, though I've only fully beaten it once so far and I'll wait to make a full opinion on it later on. But it goes without saying that what Nintendo have created here is not only the new benchmark for open world games, it's straight up really fun to play as well. There are so many solutions to almost every problem you'll face in the game that even similar interactions will be different. Maybe you choose to take on a group of bokoblins full throttle, caution to the wind berserk mode, or perhaps you choose to take it slow and shoot down a beehive to scare them off. I'd give this game's fun factor a straight 10 out of 10. It's creative, it's funny, it's brilliant. Alright, let's wrap things up. Breath of the Wild, overall, is amazing. That's all there is to it. While there are weaker aspects to the game, such as a lackluster story and underwhelming music, the focus of the developers was rebuilding what it means to be a Zelda game on the foundation of the original, which is exploration. And Breath of the Wild does that like few games I've ever played. It's so easy to get lost in Hyrule, so easy to get distracted from your main objectives, so easy to fall in love with the visuals, the towns, the characters. I love this game and I can't give it anything lower than a 9.5 out of 10. Without the tiny downsides like the lack of dungeon variety and a weak story, this game would be a solid 10 out of 10, and I really think that Breath of the Wild will be a fantastic base on which to build the future of the series. If you haven't yet, play this game. It's incredible. Thanks for watching this rather long review. What do you guys think of the game? Leave it in the comments below. Cheers guys, and I'll see you next time.